Hello everybody, I welcome you to another installment of Rant by yours truly about things that interest him and you are watching them on the internet. That was very bad. Anyhow, today we are going to be talking how one bad experience can destroy a brand image that was savored for many years in the head of one bald, middle-aged guy somewhere in the end of the world. Today we are going to be talking about Magura, because you see, when I first started to get interested in bicycles, that would be very early 2000s, essentially when I've gotten my first internet connection that wasn't a dial-up, well, I would be browsing the internet looking for that elusive bicycle gear you never see on the streets, because that would be something you install on a bicycle that you keep in a safe place and ride when no one's watching. So that would be something mythical almost. And what I've gotten most interested in, or very interested in, were disc brakes, because disc brakes were completely exotic for me. And I still remember that I would be wondering then, who on earth would want hydraulic disc brakes on a bicycle? Don't look at me now. Anyhow, the brand that was most visible in that period when it comes to disc brakes, at least for me, would be the Magura. You had three brands or three models available. That would be the Louise, the Marta and Gustav M, the most powerful brake in the world. One that stops the planet from rotating instead of stopping you. Anyhow, during those times I would get this image that Magura is this brand that makes very good brakes, very powerful brakes, and people who would use them, who would always praise them because they were so great. Now, I never got a set of Maguras because, well, the history has shown that whenever I needed something cheap, I would be getting Shimano because it always worked. If I wanted something pretty, I would always get Hope, because Hope is CNC, and I am a complete sucker for that. So I never got a set of Maguras. However, thanks to a proper conjunction of planets in the fall last year, I've gotten myself a set of Magura MT5s. Let's go through all the features of these things, and I'm going to tell you why this brake destroyed my view of Magura. Alright, so this is the hero of our video today, or shall I say the villain. This is a Magura MT5 front brake, as you can judge from the length of the hose. Although I also have a rear brake on my Kona, but that's not really relevant. This is going to be my prop for today. Now let's go through all the features. Let's start with the caliper, because that's what you're looking at when you're looking at brakes, or at least that's what I do. This is a monolithic design, so it's not two halves that were held by bolts like Shimano does, for example, or I think SRAM does that as well. A monolithic design, quad pistons. The pistons have the same size, so I guess this is the reason why these calipers coupled to a Shimano levers seem to work perfectly great. They have a very hard clamping force. The reason is that it seems like the pistons here are a bit larger than on Shimano, so you get a little bit higher mechanical advantage on the entire system. Anyhow, the pads, which is pretty cool, are held with magnets, so you just click and everything works perfectly fine. Obviously there is this hook here, so it just can't fall out. I can't really find an issue with that, although I had a brake with a similar attachment method where the magnets demagnetized themselves, but that was a Hayes CX5, so I can't really harp on Magura here. Now on the caliper you'll find the bleed port, the attachment for the hose, which is swiveling, so it's a banjo. Overall, the first impression of the entire thing is pretty good. However, I was trying to find service kits for this, so seals and everything, but it seems that it's not rebuildable, so essentially this is like Shimano, disposable. And this is the lever for the Magura MT5, and your first impression of it should be that it seems to be very light, and that's going to be an issue in a minute. However, this is an upright piston design, so the piston, the master cylinder there is traveling in this direction. This is the bar here. Now the hose exits in this direction, as you see. The blade is swiveling on this pivot here, and if you compare this to a traditional lever like the Hope here, you'll note that the lever is being clamped in a slightly different position, which is the main advantage of the upright design of a lever, because it allows you to push the shifters out of the way of the lever. At least some combinations of shifters and levers don't like each other, and this design is essentially, or most of the time, much friendlier to a lever that doesn't mount in the same place as the shifter, I guess. Although now that everyone has some sort of an integrated shifter clamp lever thingy, I don't know whether that's relevant. Although considering the Magura doesn't make the shifters, that's probably relevant for them. Anyhow, this lever is also, as you can already note, much more compact than the traditional lever, which is also one of its selling points, especially when bars weren't 800 millimeters on average, but 600 millimeters on average. So this design or this layout kind of fell out of favor in the recent years. Only Magura and I think Formula are making them still, but there was a time when Shimano was doing them, Hayes was doing them. I think only Hope and what's the other name? SRAM weren't doing these kinds of brakes. Shimano, Formula, Magura, Hayes, some Chinese name I can't even remember. Bengal, was it? Yeah, I think it was Bengal. They were doing like this. But as I said, your first impression of the lever is going to be that it is very light, and the reason for this unprecedented feat of engineering is that everything about this lever, with an exception of a few bits, is made out of plastic. Now, of course, I'm sure that this is some sort of a very fancy glass fiber reinforced plastic that, I don't know, grew in some Tibetan, what's the name? Tibetan temple or some sort of like that, but entire thing is plastic with an exception of this bolt here, the push plate, the spring, and I think the attachment bolt here is also plastic. And if you can take a view of the screws that hold the lever in place in the bar, those are essentially wood screws. This is a kind of a problem, considering that you can't torque them very hard, because if you do, you're going to break them. And in my experience, the clamping force of this lever isn't high enough to make it not move excessively. Yeah, I know I'm not supposed to have the levers rigidly on the bars, although I do because I'm a Luddite, but that's beside the point. Those levers simply move around the bars, and I'm not a fan, and I can't torque them sufficiently to not move as much, because not moving at all is probably not healthy. All the fasteners or the regulatory things are Torx T25 or T40, T25 I think, and the only adjustment you have is the lever position on the bar. So now this was my first issue, which is plastic, considering that this is a premium product after all, premium aftermarket product from a reputable company, as you remember from my preamble. I'm kind of disappointed with this, and you can see this as a problem because not only this barely holds the lever to the bar, but if you're squeezing the brake very hard, you can see how the entire thing is simply bending somewhere, and that isn't really conducive to high brake power, because if you're pushing them or pulling them very hard, you first get the bite, and then you're just pulling this and you're not really getting any more. Yeah, I know, modulation. No, that's just bad engineering. Anyhow, the second problem with this brake is that whomever thought of the bleeding method must be some sort of a trench worshipper, because they obviously have a great plan but they don't know what it is. And well, let me show you. You start bleeding by undoing this this screw here, and by the way, this is an official Magura bleeding method. I'm not making things up. You open this port here, you jam a syringe here. Now think about this. Using a proper tool that was already well known is impossible. Making your own tool is impossible. You just have to jam a syringe here. Now this is chunky as hell, and as you can imagine, when you're bleeding with the funnel, once you're done with the bleeding, you are just pushing this plunger here. You have the system closed. You can detach the funnel. You have minimal spillage of the fluid. If you're doing this with a syringe here, you're going to insert the syringe, add the brake fluid or oil in this particular case, and if you're not going to plug the end of the syringe, you're going to have the fluid everywhere. If you're not going to hold it correctly, you're going to have the brake fluid everywhere, and essentially this is dirty as all, well, as all afterlife in the worst possible interpretation. Now, if you thought that this is the junkiest part of the entire process, let me show you the other end. Do you see what's missing here? No? Okay. What's missing here is a bleed nipple, which is essentially a single directional valve which you can unscrew, which opens it, and then you can screw it back so you can close the system when you're doing the bleeding. This is how it's done on Shimano, this is how it's done on Hope, and this is how it's done on just about every brake I ever had. I think including Formula, although I don't remember, I haven't done Formulas in some time. However, since there is nothing like this, so all you're going to be doing is attaching your bleed kit. And by the way, this is a third bleed kit I broke on these brakes, but that's going to be a story for later. You're going to attach the bleed kit, you're going to do the bleeding, then you're going to try to detach the bleed kit, and then you're going to detach it, and then the entire fluid is going to leak out of the system because you have some time to attach this bolt here and screw it back on. Obviously you can't do this with the top half detached, because if you do, you're going to introduce air into the system, because once this is plugged and closed, this is open, you're going to be leaking the fluid, and you're going to close the system, but you're going to close it with some sort of air. You have to have the oil leaking out of the system in order for it not to catch air. Not very ecological and very, very, very messy. Now, the main problem is that this entire thing is the success of your bleed is very dependent on how sealed is your bleed kit. Because if you had the bleed nipple, you can always do what you do with Hope brakes, which is add some fluid, push the lever or pull the lever, close the system, push or release the lever, and you're simply using the bleed nipple to close and open the system, and the fluid is simply flowing from the lever to the lower part of the brake without any pressure. You just pushed with the lever. So once you have no air in the system, you just close the bleed nipple, detach the bleed kit, and you're done. With this particular thing, you're going to be introducing pressure into and out of the system, so any leakage on attachments of the hose or of the bleed apparatus, tool, what have you, is going to cause some sort of air being in the system, which is kind of infuriating. So, let me tell you a story of me and Magura MT5s. Alright, so let me tell you how I've gotten this set of brakes, because it's quite interesting and relevant to the story. Last fall, in a place I frequent, I saw them listed, or MT5s being listed for sale from an acquaintance of mine. They were available at a very good price, so I snatched them. I thought to myself, I'm going to need them anyway. I never had a Magura, let's try them out. They came to me, and then they sat in a box for 3 months, waiting. Now, when I finally got in the Canyon, I decided to install them, so I did. I had to do the entire reinstallment because the previous guy had an internal cable routing, so I got the brakes completely disassembled. Anyhow, I assembled them, I bled the rear, it worked more or less, although the bleeding process was kind of annoying, as you already know. Then I got bled the front, and I couldn't get it to work. So I bled once, twice, thrice, and I decided that something is wrong, so I took the brake apart, and then I saw the clear signs of a leaking brake, which is that you would see that ring of oil around the piston when you squeeze the lever. That's the first sign, and you know that the seals are blown. You need to replace the entire caliper. So I got in contact with the other guy, and he managed to get me a warranty replacement through him. I've gotten new brakes with those ginormous hoses that Magura does, 2.5 meters of hose. Why? I don't know. I guess that because this is an ambidextrous lever, I can get away with using just one SKU. Anyhow, I've gotten them, I've cut the hoses, I installed them on the Kona, that was the Kona then, and then I've gotten the rear brake to work, purely by chance, because I couldn't in the front. Anyhow, I've gotten the rear brake to work, it was biting pretty well, pretty consistently, and then I've gotten the front to not work at all. But then I thought to myself, this is a new brake, so I might have blew the bleeding procedure, it's quite annoying, so I bled it once, twice, thrice, no go. So then I thought to myself, maybe I contaminated the pads, that's why I'm having this issue. Because you know, the bleeding process is where it is, I'm quite messy. So I bought 2 sets of new pads, I installed them, I bled the brake once again, and it actually worked. For one short ride with my daughter, we went for a short trip, I've gotten the front brake to bite, and it was actually quite satisfying, although I have to say that these brakes are very soft when it comes to the lever, because obviously this being made of plastic, when you pull the lever and the brake bites into the disc, then the entire assembly of the lever is simply bending. Quite horrifying experience. No, not horrifying. Quite cheap, reminiscent of those Walmart bicycle-shaped objects. Anyhow, I've gotten the front brake to bite, it was working more or less correctly, and then I started toying with different bicycles. The Kona went on the rack and was sitting there for almost a month. And after a month I came to ride it, to work, and the first thing I noticed is that the front lever is going all the way to the bar. And then I knew that something is very, 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 very wrong, because I had this brake working correctly and now it's not. So I took the brake apart, I took the brake off the bike, I mean. I've installed a different brake there. I'm going to be faffing about with trying to get a warranty replacement for this one. Anyhow, alright, so I took it off the bike, and after the first examination I saw this very familiar ring of oil around 2 pistons on the caliper. And then I knew that something is very, very, very wrong, because I would like to remind you, I've gotten supposedly 2 sets of new brakes. That's something that shouldn't happen when it comes to new brakes, and it did. I wasn't riding the bike, so what happened? And the only explanation I have for this is that Magura has a very lax warranty process, or very lax something, or these brakes aren't really new but just refurbished, or I don't know. But it's kind of annoying, and unfortunately it is reminiscent of something that happened to me 10 years ago, when I would be all hyped up for the new Saint, the 810 series. So I bought a set of brakes, and the front would work perfectly, would work just as advertised, and then the rear would not work at all. And then it turned out that after 3 or 4 replacements of a leaking piston in the rear brake caliper, I finally sold them, and apparently the last replacement worked, because I never had an issue from the guy that I sold him faulty brakes. So there you go. And this is precisely the same story. This is a new brake and it's already leaking. And essentially the entire story of me being hyped up for Magura, the mythical brand I never had, is essentially dead, because this brake has all the signs of being capitalistically optimized, which means that it was made to be as cheap as possible. So, well, from the initial impression it looks pretty swell, but once you get to use it, you will notice that the lever is very flimsy, the caliper apparently is leaking, the bleeding process is annoying as hell, and I'm not really satisfied with them. Anyhow, I think that's all I have to say about those, because I'm going to be ranting for quite some time about them. However, I am really hoping that this is something wrong with the warranty process, or something wrong with the local distributor of Magura parts, because I mean, I went through an entire bottle of royal blood, which is more expensive than actual blood. I went through, like, I already have, I think, 2 sets of faulty pads. I bought 2 different bleeding kits, because I thought that maybe the first one I've gotten was faulty somehow. So I was quite invested in getting those to work, and they don't. Anyhow, that's all I have to say about those. I hope to see you in the next video, and I hope I'm going to get a new brake or something. You see that? That's a new brake, freshly bled, out of a factory, and it's leaking. Alright, evidence number 2. I hope this is going to be visible on the camera, because it seems that it is focused, but I can't really confirm because I don't have a live preview in high resolution. Anyhow, you can see that this piston has a little bit of brake fluid on here, while this piston has almost none, which means that the seal in the caliper on which this piston is sliding on is doing its job. It's wiping the piston off the brake fluid. There's always going to be a little bit, because you can't have a perfect seal, but there is pretty much none. It works as it should. However, this piston is almost soaking with brake fluid, which means that this brake fluid is leaking out slowly, and that is what causing me to be all greasy again, because I'm holding the caliper and it gets soaked in brake fluid. Anyhow, it means that the seal on this part is simply not doing its job.